Every day I get a little more Chinese.
早上好，中国！现在我有冰淇淋。我
Look at this. To most of you, this may look like Chinese food, but to me, I simply call this food. And that's just a small peek into how Chinese my mind has actually become. How have I been becoming Chinese, you may ask? By playing a video game called Sleeping Dogs. All jokes aside, I am actually Chinese in real life, so I can't say for sure playing this game has made me more Chinese, but who's to say it hasn't? I certainly haven't gotten less Chinese. And although this game probably won't make you Chinese in real life, the main character you play as is actually Chinese, so in a way, it does make you Chinese. A lot of people have called Sleeping Dogs Chinese GTA, and while that's not necessarily the wrong way to look at it, there's a lot more that can be said about it. This game came out only 1 year before the release of GTA 5, and shares a lot of similarities to the franchise. But I can't say I agree with the sentiment that this game is simply a GTA clone. I think Sleeping Dogs has enough unique ideas that help it differentiate itself above many other games in this genre. I'm not going to say Sleeping Dogs is necessarily better than GTA, but it is different in a compelling way. Either way, Sleeping Dogs has had a profound impact on me, and in this video I'm going to find out what's putting these dogs to sleep, what it truly means to be Chinese, and why this game has remained in my memory for over a decade. This video will contain spoilers for the video game Sleeping Dogs. The game opens in Hong Kong with a drug deal taking place in a wide open and well-lit area, as most drug deals do. We see that the drug deal is also being watched by the police. We play as Wei Shen, a small-time criminal.
Yeah, you got the money?
The drug deal quickly goes sour and Wei is forced to run from the police. Unfortunately, he is then captured and taken into custody. There, he runs into an old friend, Jackie Ma, who offers Wei an introduction to members of the Sun On Yee.
Ask anyone. Jackie Ma still looks good.
Jackie Ma is still the same old.
Interestingly, the Sun On Yee in this game are based on a real-life game called the Sun Yian, one of the most prominent triads in Hong Kong and China who engage in pretty much every illegal activity you could imagine, like racketeering, extortion, drug dealing, murder, and much, much more. Wei is then taken in for questioning, and we find out that he is actually an undercover police officer tasked with ingratiating himself and taking down the Sun On Yee. Wei is released by his supervisor Pendrew, who is a white British guy for some reason.
Good work. Use him to get close to Winston Chu. Do whatever it takes.
And after getting released, Jackie introduces Wei to Winston Chu.
I do remember you.
Winston is also a Red Pole, one of the higher-ups in the Sun On Yee and the leader of the Water Street Boys. At first, Winston really just seems like a moron with roid rage, the type of guy who uses his size and aggression to exert power over others. He lacks critical thinking skills and due to this has pretty much hit a plateau in terms of his ranking within the Sun On Yee, which also obviously seems to frustrate him. Here we also learn that Wei had a sister. Wei was actually born and raised in Hong Kong and grew up in the same neighborhood as Jackie and Winston, but moved to America when his sister started getting caught up with the gang culture and developed a serious drug problem. Despite her best efforts, she wasn't able to kick the habit and died of an overdose. This gives us a lot of insight into Wei as a character and his motivations for working undercover. Wei obviously has a chip on his shoulder and blames the gang members who abused his sister and got her addicted, leading to her eventual death. While in America, Wei became a police officer. His upbringing surrounded by gangs as a child and familiarity with their culture made him a perfect candidate for an undercover officer among the triads in San Francisco. However, reading some of the reports on Wei during that time, while his upbringing and motivation made him an effective undercover officer, for those same reasons he had a problem with violence and taking things too personally. I think this all sets up Wei's character in a realistic and pretty interesting way. He's a flawed character with strong motivations that really makes you root for him. Moving on, although hesitant and distrustful of Wei, Winston slowly has him doing more jobs for the gang. Mostly things like petty theft, shaking down vendors for money, scaring off rival gang members, and other small-time criminal activities. However, the other gang members of the Water Street Boys are distrustful of Wei and begin to start suspecting he's an undercover cop.
You know what happens to rats, Wei?
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, Conroy gave me all the details when he was helping me out on that midway.
And although tensions are rising, Wei is able to avoid suspicion for now. However, Winston and his Water Street Boys begin having territorial disputes with another Red Pole from the Sun On Yee known as Dog Eyes. Turns out Wei has some history with Dog Eyes, as he is one of the gang members who got his sister addicted to drugs all those years ago. Things continue to escalate, and Dog Eyes and his boys shoot up Winston's mother's restaurant. So naturally, Winston wants revenge. Winston tries to kill one of Dog Eyes' dealers, but Wei manages manages to convince Winston to keep him alive in order to keep the infighting within the Sun On Yee from escalating. Here, Wei really proves himself to the rest of the gang by proving himself valuable to Winston for his clever decision making and to the rest of the boys for his ruthlessness with the rest of Dog Eye's men. However, this sort of in-house violence between Red Poles has attracted the attention of the higher-ups in the Sun On Yee, who call Winston in for a meeting. Here, Wei is introduced to the other Red Poles as well as Uncle Po, the head of the Sun On Yee.
Winston, relax. I know you were provoked.
Although Winston fears the worst, things are mostly smoothed over and Winston gets through the meeting with all his fingers intact, mostly thanks to Wei's advice to Winston, keeping him from taking things too far. As Wei continues gaining the trust of the gang, Winston tells him he's getting ready to get married and he needs Wei to help his fiancée with the wedding preparations. Wei drives her around, picks up the wedding cake, and steals some valuable flowers. However, this moment is extremely important in terms of developing Wei's character and conflicting identity. Winston's fiancée talks to Wei about how important this wedding is to her, but more so how important Winston is to her. It seems they're genuinely in love and are ready to essentially become a family. The idea of family is very important to her and she expresses this to Wei. She even tells Wei that being part of the gang makes him a part of their family.
That's the secret. You do what you have to do, but you always remember your family.
And this is something that obviously resonates with him. Wei always lacked close familial connections. We can assume that when he moved to America, he lost a lot of contact with his blood relatives and even close friends. There are no mentions of his father, only his mom and sister, and the trauma of losing his sister has obviously left Wei with deep psychological scars. My point is, Wei probably has a complicated relationship to the idea of family, and it's only human nature to want to be part of a family. So at this moment when bonding with Winston's fiancée, he truly feels that Winston and the rest of the gang are his family members. But the problem is this creates a huge level of cognitive dissonance in Wei. He's an undercover cop, and no matter how well he plays the part, he knows he's going to have to betray them at some point. The wedding day arrives and most of the Sun On Yee are in attendance, including Uncle Po. However, Wei hears gunshots coming from the venue. The wedding is massacred, presumably by another gang. Deeper in the building, Wei finds Winston and his fiancée both shot and bleeding out. At this point, Wei is essentially promoted to Winston's position as a Red Pole.
Open your eyes, Raymond. I am Winston now. With him gone, I'll be taking his place. You want the chairman? I report to him now. You want the Red Poles? I'm one of them.
So while I see the wedding preparation as laying the foundation for Wei's psychological integration into the gang, this moment really hits the final nail in the coffin. I think a lot of what Wei did before this point was still at the behest of the police department. But now his motivation becomes even more personal, and from this point forward, a lot of what he does really doesn't feel like he's an undercover cop. Rather, it seems he's starting to become a true member of the Sun On Yee. But here it also becomes really clear that the interesting thing about Wei is that everything that makes him an effective undercover cop is exactly what makes him susceptible to losing his way and getting completely lost in the sauce. Wei is described by reports as a chameleon. He effortlessly adapts to the situation around him and can easily adopt different identities. The thing is, Wei doesn't just know the vernacular and culture of the gangs, there's a part of him that genuinely believes in it, which Wei can tap into due to his upbringing. But Wei doesn't really have a strong identity of his own. He moved from Hong Kong to San Francisco during his formative years. He never really identified with either side. He's both Chinese and American, but also neither. And because he never formed these permanent attachments, that means he can convincingly play the part of either side. The problem is, attachments also keep you grounded. Someone with a strong sense of identity will always be able to return to who they were, but someone without such a solid foundation could easily lose themselves and become someone else. This is what I feel is happening to Wei. He is able to play the part so well that he no longer has to pretend. After the wedding massacre, things within the Sun On Yee are getting more unstable, especially with Uncle Po being hospitalized. Wei suspects Dog Eyes was actually the one behind the wedding shootout and wants revenge. He manages to capture him and bring him to Winston's mother, who butchers him. This is purely a personal vendetta, as although Dog Eyes is a criminal, Wei acts completely outside of the law to get his payback. Wei also meets Sunny Wo, a really slimy guy who makes his money through very unsavory means.
Wei, come in, have a drink. You ever fucked some famous pussy, Wei?
At this point, Wei has entered the upper echelon of crime. Long gone are the days of petty theft and extorting small business owners. What's interesting to me is that, though the type of crime Wei is surrounded by feels much darker now, it also comes with a lot more money and a more glamorous lifestyle. With Winston, our crimes were dirty and our surroundings seem to match that, with dark alleys and a greasy restaurant. But with Sunny, the crimes are downright despicable and beyond filthy, but we're instead surrounded by penthouses and fancy cars. Wei is also approached by Broken Nose Jiang, a red pole who sees the opportunity to gain more power because of the gang's current instability. However, Big Smile Lee, another red pole with a penchant for violence and the boss of Sunny Wo, stands in her way. Wei pretty much agrees to help her as he sees her as the lesser of the two evils. Wei is ordered by his supervisor Pendrew to then collect evidence on Sunny Wo.
Whatever we can get to stick to Sunny Wo will obviously hurt Big Smile Lee. And we both want that.
Wei is hesitant, as to do so would involve exploiting an innocent woman who Sunny has been exploiting. However, he begrudgingly agrees in exchange for his friend Jackie's release from jail. Wei gets the evidence and provides it to the police. At this point, Pendrew tells Wei that the job is finished. He did what he set out to do. He got close to the red poles and collected enough evidence to put away Sunny Wo, an integral part of the gang's money-making apparatus.
I'll have Raymond arrange your debriefing. Congratulations, Wei.
What are you saying?
I'm saying it's over. You've done your job. It's time to come in.
However, Wei still feels there's more to do. He wants to take down Big Smile Lee, who he believes is the real threat, and disobeys Pendrew's orders to back off.
Fuck your orders and fuck you too, Pendrew. I came on to take down the Sun On Yi, not to shuffle the deck.
Shen, you're making a mistake.
Uncle Po then tragically dies in the hospital and a funeral is held, with all the red poles in attendance. At the funeral, the police arrest Sunny Wo, and Pendrew intentionally pulls his men away from the funeral afterwards, allowing a rival gang to attack Wei and the other red poles.
The 18K are about to do this city a great public service. And anyone who stays here deserves everything they get.
After taking down the rival gang at the funeral, the red poles have a huge dispute on who should be the next chairman, with Big Smile Lee storming off after not being unanimously chosen.
But I'm warning you here and now. Making anyone other than me the chairman will be disastrous for Sun On Yi.
Everyone has a vote. Our tradition allows...
Fuck the tradition! Ricky! It's out.
Wei and the Water Street Boys are then attacked by Big Smile Lee's men and manage to survive the onslaught. Raymond, Wei's handler, meets with Wei once more, urging him to come back and smooth things over with Pendrew.
I need you to be straight with me. Is he gonna blow my cover?
I don't know what he'll do. Not anymore. Wei, just come back with me now. You're a good man. We can fix this. Smooth it over with Pendrew.
Wei once again declines as he feels the job's not done until he takes down Big Smile Lee. At this point, I'm kind of thinking to myself whether or not Wei is really in the right here. Sure, Big Smile Lee is certainly a threat and holds a higher position than someone like Sunny, but with the arrest of Sunny as well as Uncle Po's death, the Sun On Yi have become severely fractured. Even if Big Smile Lee were to become chairman, we know that there are other red poles who would likely conspire to take his place. I don't think taking down Big Smile Lee really makes that much of a difference at this point in the story, so to me it feels like Wei is really thinking more like a red pole and wanting vengeance rather than an undercover police officer. Wei then gets a call from an unknown number telling him that Jackie has been kidnapped and buried alive by Big Smile Lee's men. Wei does manage to rescue him, but at this point Jackie is having serious regrets and tells Wei he wants to get away from all this gang stuff. Jackie's character shows us a lot of how gangs can affect its regular members. We see in Jackie how the gang sucks people in with the allure of money and power and eventually corrupts them. Jackie is Wei's friend and more or less a good guy, at least relatively. Jackie has only just killed someone for the first time and it's already weighing extremely heavily on him. I think funnily enough, Jackie really keeps Wei from going completely off the deep end. Wei ultimately wants to protect the people around him and is supportive when Jackie tells him he wants out of the gang life. But just when it seems like Jackie is going to turn things around, Wei gets a text from Jackie telling Wei to meet him. Wei goes to the location but finds Jackie gutted and strung up.
Oh, fuck. Oh my god. Jackie! Ah, fuck! Jackie!
This moment is pretty horrifying, but we're not given a lot of time to process it, as Wei is immediately knocked unconscious and kidnapped. Wei wakes up in some random building and his captor tells him that they know he's a cop.
Or should I say, Officer Shen.
It seems like Pendrew blew Wei's cover. Wei is tortured for a while, but eventually manages to escape and tracks down Big Smile Lee. It turns into an epic chase and eventually a fiery showdown on a flotilla, where Wei and Big Smile Lee face each other one-on-one. Wei, of course, ends up victorious, killing Big Smile Lee and throwing him in an ice chipper. Wei finally returns to the police and ends his undercover mission. Later on though, he receives a video in his apartment, addressed from Jiang. Wei plays the video and we see security camera footage of Pendrew killing Uncle Po in the hospital. Turns out, Pendrew had worked with Uncle Po years ago. Uncle Po provided evidence on his gang's rivals and Pendrew arrested them, which advanced both Pendrew's career and Uncle Po's status in the gang. In return, Pendrew would leave Uncle Po to manage operations without interference from law enforcement. However, as Pendrew was up for promotion, he took the opportunity to kill Uncle Po and tie up any loose ends.
And I let you and Sonny continue operating.
A sacrifice you were willing to make.
At the time. I'm putting Sonny away, and with you gone, I'll finish this once and for all.
In a full circle moment, Wei is interrogating Pendrew after arresting him, letting him know he's going to jail and will likely die there too. The game then ends with Wei deciding to stay in Hong Kong, as this place has become his home.
You know. I don't know. Job's over, but I don't really have anywhere else to go. Strange to say it after all that's happened, but Hong Kong kind of feels like home.
And that's where the credits roll. I enjoyed the story for the most part. The voice acting in particular is a really strong point, and I think the dialogue's all really well written. The characters are pretty interesting too, with Wei in particular being really compelling to uncover and examine. However, there are a few aspects of the game's plot that I don't really care for. I think my major criticism is that the game didn't go far enough into the idea of betrayal and trust. Wei is an undercover cop. He's constantly lying to everyone around him. The game builds this up in the beginning with mentions of previous undercover cops who were killed, and Wei is even almost killed himself when suspected by Winston's men. But once he gains their trust, his cover is never really put in jeopardy again, at least not until the very end. And when Wei's cover is finally blown, it's by people who already wanted to kill him anyways. And anyone who would have been affected by Wei revealing his true identity is either dead or not present at the end of the game. I really think with all this buildup of themes of brotherhood, trust, and family, there should have been a moment where Wei faces the consequences of revealing his true identity. Jackie, Winston and his fiancée, and even Uncle Po all die before finding out the truth about Wei. It would have been really interesting to see how they, or even the other Water Street boys, would have reacted to finding out the truth. I think the game just really missed out on what could have been a really dramatic and compelling moment that delivered exactly what the game had been building towards. I also think the game didn't go far enough in showing the psychological effects of Wei being undercover, and the idea of Wei becoming one of them is also something that the game doesn't really fulfill. Raymond constantly warns Wei he's taking things too far.
That's what worries me, Wei. You're one of them.
Reading through Wei's psychological profile even suggests that Wei is vulnerable to losing his sense of self and identity from being undercover, but nothing really ever comes of it. Sure, Wei crosses a few lines to fulfill his personal vendettas and accomplish his mission, but he never shows any real sign of internal struggle. He never questions if what he's doing is right or wrong, and despite showing that he cares for his fellow gang members, doesn't show any sign of guilt for betraying them. I think this game could have been a lot more interesting if Wei were to fully embrace the Sun On Yee and completely lose himself. To me, it really seemed like that was the direction the game was headed. There are obvious parallels between the hierarchical structure of the police and the Sun On Yee. As an officer, Wei has a handler, Raymond, who has a supervisor, Pendrew. As a gang member, Wei reports to Winston, who in return reports to the chairman, Uncle Po. The gang has a code, rules even they abide by. Pendrew is shown to break the rules and do what must be done. My point is, the lines here get blurry, intentionally to convey the message that to Wei, the police and the gang really might not be so different. At the end of the game, Wei even agrees with Pendrew that he became one of them.
You deserve to be handed over to Big Smile Lee.
Did I? Well, Pendrew, I guess everyone gets what he deserves.
But Wei doesn't really ever truly commit to the gang. He's never shown to fundamentally agree with their way of life, and every crime he commits is really just to maintain his cover or enact some justified vengeance. I think it would have been interesting to see Wei truly become, or at least start to get corrupted. Maybe he starts to enjoy the power and status a bit too much. Maybe he develops a drug habit like his sister, or starts to enjoy taking advantage of the money the crimes provided. Either way, I think it would have made for a more interesting character arc for Wei, whether he fully gave in to the Sun On Yee, or managed to overcome those dark impulses and truly find his own identity as a police officer. At the end of the game, Wei has this exchange with a fellow officer.
Hong Kong kind of feels like home.
Yeah. But which Hong Kong, officer?
And this kind of sums up my problem with the game's plot, and specifically Wei's lack of a character arc. We start the game with the setup of Wei being a sort of chameleon, able to live in both the world of law enforcement and criminals. The problem is that he has no strong personal identity to keep him from getting in too deep. And at the end of the game, Wei lands basically exactly where he started. Overall, the game's narrative is good, but falls flat towards the end and misses some strong potential payoffs. In terms of gameplay, Sleeping Dogs is also a bit mixed. The best part of gameplay has to be the melee combat. Wei is essentially a kung fu master. You can't have a game take place in Hong Kong without a little bit of kung fu after all. A lot of these types of games focus a lot more on gunplay and see melee combat as more of an afterthought. Here though, it's more so the opposite. You can combo heavy attacks, light attacks, grabs, counters. There are a lot of moves to unlock as you progress and a few different enemy types as well. It all makes combat scenarios really fun, and combined with the ability to perform environmental attacks really gives the game the vibe of a martial arts movie. It's honestly very satisfying to enact a little bit of police brutality kung fu style. With these GTA-like games, you don't really have such in-depth melee combat mechanics, so it feels pretty unique for the genre. It's one of the best parts of the game, which is good since you'll be doing it pretty often. You do get access to firearms later on in the game, which does help to mix up the gameplay, but the gun combat is just fine, to be honest. You have a basic cover system, you aim, and you shoot. Nothing really special here, and there isn't a really big variety of weapons either. However, I found a lot of fun using both the gun and melee combat in combination when I faced enemies in the open world. This is more so something I did just because it seemed cool. In the game's main missions, you'll pretty much be limited to either melee combat or just guns. There really aren't any scenarios where you use both in conjunction. I think the game's combat could have actually been improved by making guns, or maybe rather bullets, a bit more rare. I think combat scenarios could be a lot more interesting and engaging if you only had a few bullets and had to think strategically about how you use them. Once you get a gun, it's always easier to just shoot everyone, and this kinda demotivates you from using melee combat, which I think is a problem since the melee combat is so good. The side content is also pretty average for these types of games as well. There's some things to collect, races to race, criminals to bust, and stuff to buy. I didn't find any of the side missions that interesting, but because Wei is such a likable character, I still found it worth it just to see more of him in different situations. The game also has a few unique systems. First is the face system. Basically, the more jobs you do, the more well-known you become, which in turn grants you access to new perks and items to purchase. It's a decent way to give the game a sense of progression. There's also a cop and triad system. During main missions, if you act more like a triad member, you'll get a higher triad score, which lets you unlock abilities that make you a better criminal. And vice versa, where if you act more like a cop, mostly by not accidentally crashing into people and murdering them, you get a higher cop score and unlock abilities that make you a better cop. I really like the idea of this, especially for this game. My problem is that it seems a bit underbaked. You can get both a good cop score and a good triad score, which seems like it shouldn't really work that way. I think this would have been more interesting if it worked more like the karma system in the Infamous games. For example, if you do more criminal type stuff, you move towards the triad side, and if you did more cop stuff, you'd move toward the cop side. I think having the player choose between either option would make your actions have a lot more weight to them, and also strengthen the themes of the game. You could choose whether or not you want Wei to give in to the allures of criminal life, or whether he stays morally strong and grounded. I think taking this a step further, it could even affect the game's ending, how NPCs react to you, and what kind of items or abilities you are able to access and which ones you can't. Obviously, this would be a big undertaking for the game's developers, and perhaps it wasn't the direction they wanted to go, which is understandable, but I really think it would help to convey the themes of the game a lot better. The worst part of the game though has to be all the chase sequences. The game does try to implement some parkour mechanics. By pressing a button at the right time, we can jump over obstacles and over wide gaps. It's kind of cool at first, but to be honest, not particularly impressive or that interesting as the game goes on. There are a lot of sections in this game that involve chasing or running. You always run at the same speed, and parkour serves more as a quick-time event rather than an in-depth movement mechanic. And it's really only implemented in missions rather than being useful or fun to use in the open world. What I will say is that a pretty well done part of the game is the driving. Cars handle well, have a good weight to them, and using the e-brake to drift is really satisfying to pull off. I think the driving works especially well due to the design of the game's city, Hong Kong. There are highways, narrow alleys, and everything in between. The city is really dense and there's a lot of road variety, which makes driving challenging but fun. Speaking of Hong Kong, the city is pretty cool. I've never been, but it feels authentic. There are street vendors, businesses, lots of traffic, and tons of NPCs having random conversations.
Does his mother complain? Tolerate you two slut perverts?
She tolerates her daughter to be.
Yeah, of course she does. Anything to give her gangster thug pervert son some respectability.
Everything really has a lot of style and personality. The city looks great and feels alive, making it super fun to explore and engage with. The setting of Hong Kong is also pretty unique, especially for Western-centric video games at the time. I think a huge part of what made me interested in this game in the first place was its setting and its characters. Being Chinese myself, I really connected with this game when I first played it. In a lot of popular Western media, there's a tendency for Chinese or Asian characters to get stereotyped. The Asian guy would usually be either a nerd or a kung fu master. Them being Asian was portrayed and seen as something obviously different. So to see a game like Sleeping Dogs with an Asian American main character who was just cool because he was cool meant a lot to me. Recently, things like diversity and representation have become a very hot topic in video games, and I think a lot of gamers are generally skeptical about it. While there are a good amount of racists out there, I like to think most people's criticisms come from a good place and are more so because of the way it's implemented, which can often end up feeling extremely inauthentic. Many games will add characters for representation that ironically enough feel very stereotypical and end up accomplishing the opposite of what they intended. For example, a lot of the Asian characters in Overwatch tend to feel pretty stereotyped and in my opinion don't do anything in terms of adding good representation. But with Sleeping Dogs, Wei Shen feels like an authentic real character who just is Chinese, and seeing that always felt really meaningful to me. To be honest, I'm still not sure why the game is called Sleeping Dogs. I don't remember seeing any dogs, awake or asleep. But maybe the real sleeping dogs were the memories made, driving fast cars, beating people up, and taking down Hong Kong's most deplorable criminals. Sleeping Dogs is an important game to me. It's not perfect, but the characters are great, plot could be better, and the gameplay does have its highs and lows. But this game is awesome, because it made me Chinese. And maybe it'll make you Chinese too.
A man who never eats pork buns is never a whole man.